Really the economic outlook at this point. You've heard effectively some pretty good things. Allentown is a surprisingly strong economy. It's actually true that Pennsylvania has been surprisingly strong in this recovery. I've been, in the business since the early '80s, since mid '80s, and kind of tracking things back in my analysis back in, prior to that, into the early '80s and '70s. And I can tell you that Pennsylvania typically, prior to the steel mills collapsing, it would go in deep and come out a little slow, a little lag. But since the mills collapsed and we haven't been as cyclically sensitive, and the industry that is attached to that, Pennsylvania would come in to a recession a little bit later, usually, than the rest of the nation. And every recession's a little different. They all have their own characteristics as to why you're getting pushed into that recession. But as a rule, in the recession since the early '80s, when the mills closed their doors, the Pennsylvania came out a little late, but it didn't really rebound very strongly. There was nothing in this Pennsylvania economy that was just bringing us back up. We weren't robust. And with, again, some exception of Allentown and a few other places, but the state as a whole did not. This recession was different, and you could point to the housing and say, well, we didn't boom and we didn't bust, but that was true in the last two recessions as well. Pennsylvania didn't boom and bust in housing, and that was a component, certainly in the '90-91 recession. And so it's not just that. That doesn't explain why we're actually recovering. The biggest explanation for most of the state seems to be, without much question, Marcellus Shale and the activity surrounding that. That was getting underway about the time the recession started, and it's been a real gold rush, if you will, in that part of the state. And so it's actually, I was actually sitting here thinking about it, for Allentown to do as well as it has, to grow the way it has, without really the linkages to Marcellus Shale, is a tremendous thing. That's a very strong thing. Go back to my caveat though, growth and employment growth and so forth isn't the be all and end all. You have to look at the underlying income and how well those general incomes are doing. And I didn't put that chart in there because we're dismal enough as it is. That's an area of concern, or at least an area to work at, to study further and to work at. To the economic outlook, these are borrowed, if you will, from The Economist magazine, May 2009, a glimmer of hope as they thought we were going to come out of this recession. October 2009, they thought we were on our way after the storm, how to make the best of the recovery. And in fact, at that point, we were officially in a recovery, we learned later, but not a very strong one. And so by April 2010, they were still talking about hope at last. Well, what happened? We were climbing out of this into the recovery, and then 8 months pass, and they're talking about hope. Go through the fall to September 2010, and now they're going, forget hope. Are we there yet? March 2011, just as the world economy was recovering, we had oil. We also had the problems in Asia, and somewhere in there after March, you can talk about the, as Mike mentioned, the deficit debate or debacle in Washington, and that still weighs heavily on us today. And finally, this was actually, I think, March of 2012. This economist, crikey, Ginger, can it be the recovery? And I think, to some degree, people still aren't sure. Let me say, we're in a recovery. It's definitely a recovery. By all measures that economists use, we're in a recovery. It's not a very robust recovery. It's slow. It's going to remain slow for the foreseeable future. There are a number of drags on this economy that you're all aware of. Number one, what got us into this, precipitated it, and remains a problem, is housing and the foreclosures that are accompanying it, the number of people underwater, the number of people who maybe aren't underwater and would like to sell their house and downsize or upscale or what have you, but they can't because the market sort of soft. The housing prices have fallen. So that's a huge problem. And in my experience, looking back at all the recessions, from now back to the Great Depression, there's nothing like that. We've not had that kind of an overhang in modern times. That aspect is different. The fiscal situation is different, and I'm talking less about the federal government right now. And I don't even want to get into that because there's a lot of different views about the importance of the deficit. But let me talk about state and local government, and I'll wrap up with this as well. We're cutting jobs at the state and local government. We're cutting teachers, we're cutting police, we're cutting basic services. In most economic recessions, state and local governments took it as an opportunity, not necessarily to raise general hiring, but to certainly spend money on capital infrastructure. We are not doing that. We are spending less on capital infrastructure from the federal government on down. That has become a fiscal drag. It's unlike this is as bad as it's ever been in a recession, to have that lack of extra, you can call it stimulus. I will show you later, it's not stimulus, this is this is money that we need to be spending. Stimulus is beside the point. The uncertainty is tremendous. It's a slow recovery. Virtually everybody you hear from now says, I think we're underway. I think, we're working hard. We could hire a few people, but I'm going to wait until we're sure. And this has been going on for a couple of years. We're waiting until we're sure. And the problems in Washington right now are going to keep that waiting continuing probably until after the election, maybe later. Maybe after the election. It's not clear that the election will resolve some things. Europe has been an ongoing issue. It's sort of like us that we know they're getting sort of worse slowly. We hope it's being contained, and the severity of the recession that plagues Europe may determine whether or not we get dragged back into one. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with our economy other than these drags I mentioned, but we're in a recovery. We can continue in that recovery. We can slog our way out, even with these anchors that we're dragging. But I don't know how much we can do if Europe goes into recession, if China continues to slow, as they seem to be planning to do. Monetary policy is, Federal Reserve's been doing it. I think, like I said, I wasn't here 3 years ago. I would argue that the Federal Reserve did save the economy from a much worse fate. You can argue, you can quibble if you wish over QE1 and QE2. If the federal government and state and local governments were doing more on the fiscal side with some stimulus, spending something to get the economy going, because the private sector, remember, is largely sidelined, waiting to see if something happens. Meanwhile, the fiscal stimulus has been going the other way. It's contractionary at every level of government. With the fiscal stimulus, with fiscal being contractionary, monetary policy has been effectively asked to do more than it should. QE1 and QE2 were somewhat effective, or maybe as good as we could hope. QE3, if we really sank into a recession, no one's looking at QE3 now, but if we really were clearly sinking into a recession, I would imagine that is back on the table. But it would take that, and so I think that's the summary of where the outlook is and where we're going.